So we just wanted to take a minute before we get started. I'm Allison Treaster with the Allegheny Conference on Team Passport. I'm here in my home kitchen. As you can see, I'll be cooking along today with Itha. But we did want to start out and just get to know each other a little bit. So if you guys want to put your name in the chat, say hello, say where you're coming from. And I'm actually gonna unmute. You have the ability to mute and unmute yourself. So if you want to just jump in and say hello, Maria, Rebecca, Sarah, Preeti, we'd love to hear from you guys too.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, where are you coming from?
So right now I'm in Cleveland, Ohio.
Awesome, I'm also from Cleveland. What part of Cleveland?
I live in Cleveland Heights right now.
Awesome, welcome.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Maria Healy. I'm calling in from Marysville, Ohio, so about 2 hours, 30 minutes south of you.
Fantastic. Well, we're hoping to get all you Ohioans over to Pittsburgh. I am a convert myself, so we could use a few more.
We want to come.
Just so you know, I'm originally from New York City, and so I'm in Cleveland now for school, and I just stayed here even after the COVID-19. So I am totally up for moving around, just so you know.
Fantastic. Well, we're thrilled to have you with the passport, and we're hoping that you can connect with an employer and be here.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Sarah, and I'm currently from Pittsburgh, about like 20 miles north of it, and I recently graduated, and my computer camera doesn't work, so that's why I don't have like my video on. So, sorry.
No worries at all. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to jump in and say hi? All right, well, we're so glad that you're all here. We hope you're hungry. We hope you're ready to cook. We'll have more opportunities for you to get to know each other tonight and at all the passport events, but we really want to get started. Tonight, we are thrilled to have Itha Cao running the show. Her day job is leading the city of Pittsburgh's inclusive innovation efforts, as well as overseeing PGH Lab, which is the city's urban incubator for startups. But by night, she sports her chef coat and a knife, and she's teaching cooking classes, hosting pop-up dinners, and having candid conversations about culture, diversity, and how food can really bring people together. She also beat out a college English professor, a writer, and all manner of smart people in a local spelling bee last year. So watch her spelling on the Q&A, she'll be watching. But we're really excited to cook along with you tonight. Itha, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks so much, Allison. And thank you all for joining me today. I'm actually originally from State College, so Central Pennsylvania. So actually the wielding a knife, I have to say, I also used to be a martial arts instructor. So that has a dual meaning. So I did really want to start with, just the Hungry Cao. Allison, could we start the PowerPoint really quickly? Thank you. So yeah, the Hungry Cao, as Allison mentioned, my last name is Cao. So actually the name of my business is Facebook crowdsourced. And so it's kind of a funny twist on words. And because I'm from Central PA, there's a lot of cows there. And so you can see the logo has what was traditionally a Chinese emperor's hat. So my last name is actually a royal last name, like many Chinese last names like Wang, which means king. And today we're going to be talking about the racialization of Chinese food. So please follow me on Instagram. I'm much more active on that. I recognize Gen Zers don't use Facebook as much, and now I'm leaning towards that as well. But yeah, just very quickly to the next slide. The Hungry Cao has a dual mission. So really it's around cooking classes and education. I'm very excited to cook with you today and show you some of my tips and tricks that I've learned along the way. And the second big component is donating funding to intersectional social justice causes. I think growing up, especially in Central Pennsylvania, I did not see people who looked like me on television. It was not like today where there's tons of media on that. And I think when people talk about representation matters, it truly does. So I saw role models who look like me. So Chef Martin Yan on Food Network, who is the first East Asian Chinese chef from, I believe, the early 80s and is still cooking strong today. I think he's in his 70s. And I also saw Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan, so hence the martial arts. But I think that is to say that, you know, the experience, especially nowadays, we see of racial minorities are very diverse, but at the same time, they are extremely intersectional and they all affect each other. So these are just some of the organizations that I've supported in the past, and proceeds from today's event will be, have already been donated to the George Floyd Memorial Fund. Next slide, please. All right, so just very quickly, we're going to do a quick history lesson before our cooking. So China, as you all know, is a humongous country, and there are 8 great cuisines. So this is a very basic map. And because China is one of the world's 4 greatest and ancient civilizations, it actually dates back to the Shang Dynasty, which was over 3,000 years ago. So there are over 55 recognized ethnic minorities in China. I myself am mixed. Mostly Han and some Manchurian. And so, of course, the ethnic groups as well as the geography will affect the types of food. So my family is from the northeastern region. If you see like the braised spare rib and seafood kind of in the middle over there. So it's very close to Russia. It's extremely cold. And wheat was the primary source of grain. So actually in my family, we eat more of the noodles, dumplings, scallion pancakes, and of course, stir fry like many regions. Next slide, please. So very quickly, the immigration of the first Chinese to the US was in the 1800s during the gold rush to San Francisco. And they were from Canton, which was South China. And this is a picture from that era. And as one of the news articles said, it was one of the best restaurants, as one patron recalled, were kept by Chinese and the poorest and dearest by Americans. And solely because the Chinese had centuries of experience in hospitality, and America was still a pretty new country at that point. Next slide, please. And of course, we see the anti-Chinese sentiment and the othering. You know, there were already immigrants to a new country, looked different, dressed differently, spoke a different language. And because of the decline in gold resources, it really brought about a lot of othering. So you see ads from the 1800s where, you know, Uncle Sam is kicking the Chinese out of the country. And of course, there was something called the Yellow Peril, which was kind of the invasion of the Chinese. And that was kind of seen as the othering and the public promotion of scapegoating. So it resulted in the treaty that regulated the immigration of Chinese, as well as the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, and it only ended in 1943, so we're actually, you know, it's not that long ago. And then in the 1860s, that's whenever a lot of the work around the Transcontinental Railroad began. So next slide, please. So this is just an article that was published by the Board of Health, where Chinatown was declared a nuisance. So Chinatown, as we know it today, is like a cool place to get really delicious Chinese food and dim sum. But back in the day, as we see in history with many racial minorities, there was redlining, and the Chinese were not allowed to live in certain regions, and so they formed Chinatown. But of course, we see this kind of the depiction of Chinese people as other, as eating things or living together in very unsanitary conditions. Next slide, please. And this actually affects Pittsburgh. For those of you who may not be aware, we actually did have a Chinatown that was from the late 1800s to 1959, and there were over 500 residents, and it was on 2nd and 3rd Ave, actually really close to my workplace, the City County building. And like many other cases of gentrification, the building of the Boulevard of the Allies highway squeezed out the community in 1921. And the only remaining building, actually, you can see on the left, Chinatown Inn is the last remaining building of what used to be Pittsburgh's Chinatown. And if you are a fan of Disney Mulan's the show and the movie, Ming-Na Wen, who her parents owned that restaurant up until recently, who's the voice of Mulan, her parents owned that restaurant once upon a time, and there's no other existing building that remains today. Next slide, please. And that brings us to the Chinese restaurant syndrome. I'm sure you've heard of it, the fear of MSG. So, I really want to talk a lot about this today because we kind of see a lot of this recurring, right? We see history repeating itself, where there's definitely a lot of fear around Chinese food, and it stemmed from whenever the Chinese first set foot in the US. So what is MSG? Monosodium glutamate. So it's really a sodium salt of glutamic acid. That's the scientific stuff, and it's naturally occurring actually in tomatoes and cheese, and it's really what gives it that salty, umami, savory flavor. A lot of people say that it causes headaches, cancer, it'll ruin your life. But a lot of blinded studies and scientific studies have shown no such effects when MSG was combined with food in normal concentrations, kind of less is best, don't overdo anything, everything, and it was inconclusive. So, as a personal anecdote, my family and hundreds upon thousands of Chinese people and East Asian people have eaten it for generations. And as humans, we're all 99.9% genetically the same. So I highly doubt that 0.1%, gives me that superpower. And actually, it was most commonly used in the US during World War II, when there was food scarcity, when there was food insecurity. Nowadays, we see it most commonly in junk food and snack foods like the Doritos, the cheesy Cheetos, those things that are really bad for you, but taste really good. So again, everything in moderation. A lot of people think that, MSG is really bad for you, but also sugar is really bad for you, but it's so good. So really just, less is best. And of course, decrease your sodium intake in general, of course. So next slide, please. We also see, Allison, could you move to the next slide? Thank you. So we also see federal government influence, right? So in the 1920s, that's whenever we saw what we know as Chinese American food today. So the kind of heavier brown sauce, sweet and sour, because that's what people wanted to eat. Nowadays, we kind of see less of that, and we will not be cooking Chinese American food today. Even though I personally love it, and it was one of my staples during college. Panda Express was the best, and I swear it got me through college. In 1965, we saw the liberalization of US immigration policy, and what that meant was that there were immigrants from all over, like Shanghai, Chengdu, that were allowed to come to the United States, and with them, they brought their food. And that really exploded in 1972 when President Nixon visited Beijing, and it was after 25 years of not talking, of China and the US having zero relations, and it was actually a diplomatic move, but because of that, Nixon was depicted on TV and in newspaper with these amazing spreads of food, and Americans were like, I want that. I want to eat that delicious food. What is it? And thus we see kind of the explosion of Chinese food in the US as we know it today. And now, of course, we see from 2016 to 2020, current President Trump calling Chinese food the Kung flu or the Chinese virus, which has, in my opinion, just exacerbated already kind of the hate crimes that have happened against people who look like me, whether verbal or physical. So moving on to the next slide. If you've ever watched Ugly Delicious by Chef David Chang, who's actually Korean American, but does an excellent job talking about Chinese food as well as many other ethnic minority foods, one of the things that he says that resounded with me was that Chinese food is more American than apple pie. And that's because there are over 45,000 Chinese restaurants in the United States. And that's more than all of the Mickey D's, KFC's, Pizza Hut's, Taco Bell's, Wendy's combined. So I really recommend that you check it out on Netflix. It also makes you very hungry. So I advise to do it before dinner time. And he just does a phenomenal job talking about the origins of different types of ethnic food. And the reason why it's called Ugly Delicious is that it kind of combats that very Western view of you have a beautiful clean white plate with a smear of a little sauce and then like a little tiny like seashell on it or something with a little bite of like a soup or something. So really thinking about, ethnic food and how it's depicted, it could be seen as ugly, like a curry, but it's still delicious, and that doesn't mean anything less. And the second thing that I would recommend that you check out is PBS did a phenomenal series on Asian Americans and released it during Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And encompasses all of the history that I talked about and more, and especially a lot of the intersection between Asian and Black history and Latinx history, which is phenomenal, and they did a really great job. Okay, so I've talked a lot, so let's start cooking. So very quickly, for those of you cooking at home, I just wanted to go over some basics. So stir fry is called chao cai in Chinese, and chao means that you cook it over a flame, and cai literally means vegetable. So actually, I grew up eating pretty vegetarian, and that's just because my parents grew up in northeastern China, and this was post-World War II. After the Japanese occupation, so there was a lot of food insecurity. You know, food was just scarce, and meat was even more scarce, meat and eggs. One of the memories that my mom recalls in her childhood is that once a year during her birthday, she would have a hard-boiled egg on her bowl of birthday noodles, and that was the only time they could afford to eat eggs during the year. So really thinking about, you know, how far we've come and how far my family has come is really great. So the three things that you want to focus on when you have a stir fry, and honestly, whenever you have any type of dish, is this order: the color, aroma, and then the flavor. So of course, whenever you see someone bring a steaming dish to the table, the first thing that you see is the color. So you want to make sure that they contrast with each other, but it's not too much. And then of course you smell it, and then you want to have the taste of the delicious dish. So next slide, please. So I look at it like this: Chinese food, like many other cuisines. So I've worked in French, American, Italian, Indian restaurants. Prep time is 95%. Cooking time is probably 5%, and especially with Chinese food. So for stir fry today, we will be making what I call kind of a light sauce stir fry. So if you've ever had dry fry, a lot of those are spicy Sichuan. There's no sauce, it's just kind of oil and chilies, or aromatics and whatever you are stir frying. The heavy sauce you kind of see a little bit more with the Chinese American food, with kind of like a very thick cornstarch based sweet and sour brown sauce that kind of all of the ingredients are drowning in. And then of course you can pan fry or sear, and then you can deep fry. So what kind of ingredients should you use? So a rule of thumb that I like to use is 1 to 3 main ingredients. So less is best, simple is better, and I, as a non-fashion person, like to equate it to matching colors of outfits. So I usually go 3, 5 maximum ingredients or colors, because if you have too many things, they're just competing with each other, and then you don't have a very solid dish. So of course, with the prep comes knife skills. For many of the classes that I've taught, all of them, there's always somebody who has a fear of a knife. My thing is, don't be afraid. I will show you how to do it. And also, you know, practice makes perfect. There's no secret to it. And we'll be going over a little bit of the dicing, a little bit of the julienning. And today we will not be going over the bias cut or the rolling cut, but that is just to say that knife skills are so important. And next slide. So without further ado, we are going to start cooking. So today we'll be making a fried tofu puff and bok choy stir fry. This recipe is super easy. I ate it a ton when I was in college. I still eat it a ton as an adult. And I think that it's, you know, it has all of the elements that I talked about, and it's also extremely healthy for you. Oh, yes. Great. Next slide, please. And without further ado, what I'm going to do is share my video. Okay.
So as Etha's getting set up, if anyone has questions, feel free to throw them into the chat function. Also feel free to introduce yourself. We did some introductions at the beginning, but I know a few people have joined. I am cooking dinner for my family tonight, so I'm attempting to follow along with Etha tonight, so we're looking forward. I hope some of you are also cooking along with us. You all should have the recipe emailed to you. If for some reason you don't, send us an email. We're happy to send that to you. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop screen sharing so that you can see what Etha's doing firsthand. She has one camera on her and one on looking down on what she's doing, so you can switch between the two camera angles to see what you'd like to see best. But looking forward to cooking with you.
Thanks, Allison. Yeah, and feel free to ask questions, like she said. I'm pretty good at multitasking. So yeah, everyone can see the cutting board okay. So what we're first gonna do is we're going to I'll just go over all of the ingredients really quick and do a little show and tell. So first on the list, we got about, and I have to preface this with saying that, you know, cooking is truly an art and baking is a science. So of course, if you love garlic like me, you're going to overput garlic. But, you know, if you're not really into sodium, you may put less salt. So, you know, as a person who honestly does not really cook with recipes, I would have to say that, like, please use my recipe as a base. You know, you don't have to stick to it. Maybe try to for the first try, but it's not like a cake. You know, if you add more or less or something, you won't get kind of a gloppy mess. You'll probably have something delicious. All right, so ingredients. First, we have about 1/3 cup of water, and then we have 1.5 teaspoons of cornstarch. So Eastern cuisine, especially Chinese food, cornstarch is the thickening agent, unlike flour, which is more Western. 1 teaspoon of MSG, or what I have is chicken bouillon. I have about 1 teaspoon salt, or to taste. Usually, actually, if I have chicken bouillon or something like an MSG sodium, I pick one or the other. I just personally believe the chicken bouillon has a little bit more depth of flavor. 1/4 teaspoon of white pepper. So white pepper, I think you'll notice, is a little bit more subtle than black pepper, but just don't add too much of it just because you can't see it. 1 tablespoon of vegetable oil. So we'll be using that to fry. 4 cloves of thinly sliced garlic, and I'll go over some of the slicing techniques that I use. About 2 pounds of bok choy. So you can use Shanghai bok choy. You can use baby bok choy. These are all pretty, you know, small. I did see some at the farmer's market that are giant, so go with what you like the best. But I think another thing about Chinese cooking is that you do not want your guest or whoever's eating to do a lot of work. So very different than Western cooking. You do not want to bring knives to the table. That in Chinese cooking means that the chef has done a very poor job of prepping, which is why you want to do a lot of knife work. And then you want to have your about 1 cup of fried tofu puffs. So you'll see really close to the screen. I'll do like close to the screen. It's very spongy in texture, and it's kind of squishy. So these are great even if you're not a tofu fan, because they soak up all of the, if you're making a curry or a soup or a sauce, they soak up all that good flavor. And then we have 2 teaspoons of sesame oil. So note on sesame oil, a lot of people like to use this to cook, and that's cool, but do be mindful that it has a higher smoke point, so it will get hotter faster. But then also it's pretty expensive. So as you know, college students or college grads, it's a lot of money to be spending on a cooking oil. I like to use it as a finishing oil, almost kind of like a really good olive oil, so you get that nice flavor. And then of course we have our sliced, rehydrated shiitake mushrooms. So you can use fresh shiitake mushrooms. In my opinion, the rehydrated ones have a lot stronger flavor, just because think about like the difference between a grape and a raisin. They have very different flavor profiles, and a raisin is kind of like, wow, it's really sweet and it has a lot of flavor. So really quickly, I'm going to talk about materials. So right here, I have a Western chef knife that kind of has this rounded edge. I have a Chinese cleaver. Since you all are, you know, trying to save money, and I would not spend a ton of, I have never been a fan of that, but I think that, you know, for less than 30 bucks, you can get a really good knife that will last you a lifetime. What I do want to mention is that, you know, I have really small hands, for example, and I need to find something that fits really well. And I also like really heavy things, and then I don't have to do as much work. So actually I got this Wusthof knife, which is a German brand, and it can be very fancy. I actually got this at Goodwill for like $5. And then this Chinese cleaver I got at Lotus Grocery for I think 15 bucks. They work great. So I think just, just like a good pair of shoes, you want to try them out and make sure that it fits and you like it. So one quick note on sharpening. The biggest thing that I see, especially with people who are afraid or have cut themselves, is that they have been going at it with a blunt knife. So what you want to do to check the sharpness of your knife is you want to hold it up like this, so the knife blade is pointing up towards your eyes, and you want to look straight down the center. And if there are glinty pieces, so you can see, if there are glints along the knife, that means that the knife is a little bit out of line. So that is whenever you use something called a honer, and I can give a quick tutorial. A lot of chefs, do this on TV, and they're like, so really what they're doing is that this honer straightens the knife blade. So if you have a double-edged knife blade, you move it down. Well, first of all, you want to make sure that your fingers are protected. So you move it down one side, and then you move it down the other. And what we have here is about a 30-degree angle. And then, of course, get your technique down first, and then when you get really comfortable, then you can do that cool thing they do on TV. But that is to say that also the best test for the sharpness of a blade is to slice a tomato. So we will not be cooking with a tomato today. But this is a really beautiful tomato I got from the farmer's market, and it's actually kind of squishy right now, which is perfect because a tomato has extremely thin skin, so it's able to test if your knife is sharp. And so a very quick lesson on how to hold a round, kind of wiggly vegetable without cutting your fingers off. You want to do what we call a claw. So you want to make sure that your nails are back, they're not flat out, so you don't cut your fingers off. You want to make sure that the knife is aligned with the first knuckle, especially if you have something that's a little awkward shaped. And then you just want to line up your knife, and then you just move the knife down. You shouldn't have to use a lot of muscle. I'm not an extremely big person, but because I have a sharp knife, I can cut with very little effort. Same thing with the chef cleaver. What I like to do is I pinch the blade with my 2 fingers up here. And I usually cut with the portion of the knife that is closest to the handle. So that means, I have a lot of control over the knife. And again, I'm barely using any effort right now. It should slice through clean as butter. So with that knife demo, I'll get these tomato slices out of the way, and we'll start cooking the actual recipe.
Hey, Itha.
Yes, hi.
It's Kat McLaughlin. How are you?
Oh, hi, Kat. I'm good. How are you?
Good. I'm so excited to be part of this. It's awesome. You're doing such an amazing job. I have a question.
Yeah.
I don't often see tomato in Chinese cooking, so I was surprised to hear that.
Well, Kat, I actually use tomato a lot, but I should have picked a different recipe.
It's just interesting because it's not, you see it in so many other.
Chinese. Right. Yeah. So I think, I don't know if you were here for the portion where I talked about probably the very beginning. Chinese food is very regional. So if you're thinking about the US, right, there is no singular US cuisine. You got, maybe your burgers and fries, for example, but if you're thinking about like Southern Louisiana cooking versus the pierogies we love in Pittsburgh, it's very different because of climate, because of, the ethnic groups that came to that region. And so actually my family is from northeastern China that's very close to Russia. Tomatoes in the cuisine, onions and tomato, and it is phenomenal. Very simple, 3 ingredients, but yeah, I think if you actually go to Northeastern Kitchen, that's a pretty recent Northeastern Chinese restaurant that came to Pittsburgh, and I was overjoyed, and I was first in line to check it out. But yeah, the majority of Chinese cuisine that we see in Pittsburgh, at least, does not have a lot of tomatoes because they're usually from, like, I would say Canton or Southern China, where it's not as big in the cuisine. Is that helpful? And Cat disappeared. All right. Well, so without further ado, I will be doing a very cutting demo with the ingredients. So what we have here are the fried tofu puffs. So again, we have like this squishy, spongy thing. And then you take the claw technique to not cut off ours again. So then we end up with 4 pieces of tofu right there. So again, you want to have your claw. You want to make sure you're pinching the blade and have the blade right up against your fingers. And you want to slice it in half and then slice it in half again. And these are pretty, they take up a lot of room. So whenever the recipe says 1 cup, you know, you can play around with that. So with the shiitake mushroom, and I will do a shiitake mushroom close up here and get water all over my computer. This is a rehydrated shiitake mushroom, and again, it has a much more stronger flavor. And same thing with this. Let's see if I can get closer.
And just a reminder, everyone, you can change your view. So if you're on Itha talking, you can switch over and see what she's doing with her hands by changing your view at the top. Just a reminder. And Itha, while I'm talking, Maya had a question about what got you started in cooking whenever you're.
Thank you for that question. Yeah, what got me started in cooking? I like to eat. I think it's pretty, you know, a pretty standard answer, but I also recognize it's not everyone's thing, right? Like not everybody likes to cook. Not everybody has the time realistically. And not everyone, you know, really enjoys it. For me, I think cooking, you know, as with many families, started from cooking with my family. So my parents, I grew up with my grandparents as well for a period of time. And really, in many cultures, especially Chinese cultures, you know, people come together through food. I think we see that nowadays too. I feel like everybody online is a sourdough bread baker and also a chef nowadays. So I'm really excited for that. And I think, you know, what started me cooking too was, again, representation. Central Pennsylvania, you know, I was born in 1989. I did not see anyone who looked like me on television except for Chef Martin Yan, except for Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan. So I do definitely credit role models and people who look like you to the future careers that people choose. So yeah, I hope that that answered the question. All right, so one thing with garlic too, so I'm using the Chinese cleaver, but of course you can still use Western chef knife, either one. I just like the cleaver because it has a little bit more heft to it. So one thing I like to do is just crush the garlic, and that makes it very easy to peel. And then you can just slice off the little ends and then do the same thing with your other clove. And in this recipe, there are 4 cloves. I'm not gonna lie, I already put in 4 in my little bowl because I love garlic. I'm sure I have many friends who also are garlic fans. Just make sure everyone in your household eats it. So with garlic, since it's so tiny, what really helps is if, again, you do that little claw where you back up your nails and then you just make very careful slices. And then of course, once you get confident, then you can chop extremely quickly. But you know, this is not a race, it's a marathon. Once you have the technique down, you can be a lot more confident. So now I have slices. So then how do you get that little minced garlic that we really want? So what I do is I do kind of a upwards chop and then back. And then the reason why I actually like the Chinese cleaver so much, other than the fact that I'm Chinese, is that it's really good for as a bench scraper. So you can scrape all of your garlic together and then you can continue to mince. So this is minced garlic. And I am leaving the pieces a little bit bigger so they don't disappear completely. So I actually kind of have 6 cloves in my bowl, even though the recipe has a little bit less than that, but that's perfectly fine. Okay, so now what we have to do is slice up the bok choy. So this beautiful, lovely vegetable. If you've never had it, it's very juicy. I would almost compare it if you've ever had Napa cabbage. It's kind of like that, but it has a beautiful color. It features very well in soups, stir fries. You can steam it. One thing to note is that this is typically grown in sandy or loamy soil. So sometimes there will be, you know, dirt or sand hiding in the bok choy. Some of it is grown hydroponically. So just double check I would peel off the outer leaves to make sure that there isn't a whole lot of dirt in there. But for the purposes of this recipe, you can either slice it in half because these are little. If you have those massive bok choy that you find sometimes at the market, those you can slice into quarters. Sometimes if you do have small mouths to feed in your household, I would recommend you just to peel all of the leaves off of the bok choy. And of course, this is a very fun chore that all children love, so you can make them do that. And of course, like with the Chinese cooking presentation that I went over, you want to make sure that the guests who are eating your food don't have to do work. You don't want them gnawing on a massive bok choy. You want to be able to have bite-sized pieces that are pretty uniform. So actually, if we look at all of the 3 ingredients that are the largest, they're all about the same size. So you don't really want to have massive chunks of anything. They all should be not competing with each other. They should be harmonizing with each other. So with the bok choy, I did peel some of the outside leaves off, so those can be a good pairing with the bok choy that I have sliced into quarters or in halves.
So Preeti, I think I see your kitchen. Does that mean that you're cooking along with us?
So I'm cooking, just not this, but I'm a fan of cooking. So I can't miss this. Like I watch all the cooking shows. So it's just, this is exciting for me.
That's awesome. So Itha, what is your favorite local farmers market in Pittsburgh, and especially for ingredients that you're cooking for Chinese cuisine?
Sure. So I'm going to be honest that I'm actually very spoiled growing up in central Pennsylvania, and I'm used to Amish farmers markets that sell extremely large quantities of everything. Pittsburgh farmers markets, I am a fan. I live in Lawrenceville, so of course I have to give a shout out to my local neighborhood market, and they actually are asking if I would be interested in being a fresh cooked food vendor. So that's exciting. The Bloomfield Farmers Market, of course, is great. But honestly, for a lot of Chinese ingredients, it's hard to find at farmers markets. So I encourage you to go to your local Asian grocery. My favorite, and actually the reason why I picked Pittsburgh for grad school, was Lotus Grocery, because they sold my favorite brand of soy sauce, and that may be a very strange reason to pick a city to live. But food is very important to me, and so are groceries. I have seen bok choy and Napa cabbage sold at the Bloomfield Farmers Market, and at the Lawrenceville Farmers Market I saw had bok choy last week. So yeah, I think I do a mix and match. Honestly, I go to Aldi's, I go to farmers markets, and I go to Asian groceries, but I know that shopping doesn't bring everybody joy, especially for groceries, but it does for me. So yeah, I think, definitely pick what is best for you. And again, these are just basic recipes. You do not have to follow it by the book. If you happen to have celery and carrots and like some potatoes in the fridge, like do a stir fry. I don't think there are hard and fast rules. A lot of it is just whatever you have in the fridge. Can it be delicious, nutritious, and not be kind of steamed mush that some vegetables can be. So without further ado, I'm going to move my camera to, let's see, this pan. So I do want to speak very quickly about pans. I think there's a lot of questions, and Allison, you had a question about using a wok. So I actually did not grow up using a wok. That's something that I developed later in life because I'm bougie. So what I wanted to show you is that this is a steel wok, and it's extremely heavy. So I think that can be a discouraging factor. Also, it's huge. So if you have a small sink, it's difficult to rinse in the small sink. What everybody does have is some sort of a flat pan. I would encourage you to have kind of a larger cooking surface. And the reason why woks are so popular is because I have a gas stove. So, distribute heat extremely well. But as long as you have some sort of a large pan where food won't be dropping all over the floor, you'll be okay. So what we're gonna do is make sure that the pan is nice and hot before we add our oil. One of the biggest mistakes that I see people make is that they add in the oil and then they're like, why isn't it hot? Like, why is my food mushy? Why is it sticking to the pan? And that's simple science. If you think about, you know, the hot pan and then later the hot oil, you have to make sure that it provides a non-stick surface. Or you can just cheat and get a non-stick pan. There really is, you know, you should use what you have in the house. So you want to move the oil around the pan. And one way to check if the oil is hot enough is to flick some water on it. And of course, you know, wear your apron. If you are cooking with children, be careful. So as you can see here, it's kind of crackling a little bit. So that means that the oil is hot enough. So number one rule of Chinese stir fry, and with many other cuisines, is that you want to cook the hardest things first. So it's the root vegetables, it's the aromatics. So with that, we want to put in our garlic first. And you'll notice that I'm just cooking with regular old chopsticks. After the kitchen cleaver, chopsticks are my favorite utensil because they are so versatile. You can whip up eggs with them. I cook stir fry with them, and then that's one less thing to wash. Okay. And one quick thing about the cornstarch slurry that you want to make for later. You can mix it in advance, but that is just to say that it can settle, and then you'll have kind of this science experiment that you'll have to remix later. Okay, so you have our garlic. You see it's browning nicely. And then the next step, you want to add your shiitake mushrooms. So, you know, mushrooms are something that you can't, it's pretty hard to overcook, and it won't get mushy too much. Do you see that? Okay, and then next thing we want to do is add our tofu. So also keep in mind that this fried tofu is actually cooked already. So what they do is just, they're cubes of tofu and then it's deep fried. Make sure we get all of that good stuff in there. And this is one of my favorite recipes that I loved during college. I still love it today. As long as you have probably, if you want to speed cook, like Iron Chef, you could probably do it in 20 minutes. If you want to take your time, maybe 30 minutes or so. And it's also great for leftovers because let's be real, all of us have lives and we can be cooking breakfast, lunch, and dinner fresh every single day.
Etha, I'm going to jump in with a question from Leisha. Please correct me if I'm wrong and unmute yourself on the pronunciation. What approximate temperature should you use? Medium heat, high heat?
Sure. Thanks for that question. I use high heat. So you see the stove is on high. And so with something like this, where you know your tofu is already cooked, your bok choy cooks extremely quickly, and then also the mushrooms are pretty much ready to go. High heat is best. Because one thing about bok choy, even though it's very beautiful and green here, the last thing you want to do is turn it kind of this yellow wilty color. And so you want to have high heat at all times for this. And one thing too is that if you do have a thin bottom pan, and because this is one of the light sauce recipes, and you don't want it to burn, you can put in some water. And what that'll do is lightly steam the bok choy. And do not put a lid on it. And the reason why is because if you put a lid on it, you know, it will cook faster, but it'll cook too fast. And so then you won't have this beautiful contrasting color. You'll end up having bok choy that looks orangey yellow, and you don't want that. Okay, so you want to cook it just so that you see these leaves are actually still kind of raw looking. You want to make sure the leaves are wilted, like this one, for example. And I'll hold it up to the camera. So, you know, this is only a couple minutes. Like, we're not really spending a ton of time cooking right now. And while you're waiting for the leaves to wilt, what you can then do is mix up your cornstarch slurry. So what I did was just mix some water, and then that cornstarch, you see, is kind of stuck at the bottom. So you want to make sure that's mixed in really well. And before you add that, you want to add your salt and your pepper. So here we have some of the white pepper. And then our chicken bouillon, or MSG. And then if you really love salt like me, you can put in some extra salt. And again, here's one other note for my friends who, are already really good at cooking, like you, Allison, and kind of just want to ad-lib it a little bit. Personally, I'm a huge fan of spicy food. It's actually not regional to Chinese cuisine in the north. It's very regional to the south. So we see Sichuan food in Pittsburgh, like Haoli, or like Chengdu Garden. Those are all very spicy regions of China. And my family comes from, honestly, kind of just a blander region where, like my mom, for example, thinks that black pepper, even like a little crack, she goes, ooh, it's so spicy. I'm not like that. I'm kind of a deviant in the family in that regard. So what I like to use is I'm going to do a free promo called Laoganma. So it's actually a chili sauce. It's a chili oil-based sauce. I'm gonna scoop out a spoonful to show y'all. So it looks like that. And so it has full chili pieces in it. And you can also get it at your local Lotus or many more, or Oriental Market. And so if you do want spicy food, not required, you can add it in now, because a lot of sauces, they're kind of oil based, and they might congeal a little bit in the fridge. So you're just warming it up, so it'll the sauce will coat all of your veggies. Okay, so now it's time to add the chicken. You see very closely that the vegetables are wilted, but not so much that the stock is mushy. There's still going to be a lot of crisp to it. And one thing that I grew up is I love vegetables. I never understood my friends who hated vegetables until I went to my friend's house, whose mom was a lovely cook, except when she came to vegetables, because the broccoli was mushy and steamed within an inch of its life. And I'm sure we've all had that at some point, but that is not what we're going for here today. So once that is all wilted and all of your veggies are coated in that delicious flavoring, then you want to put in your cornstarch sauce. And at that point, you can actually turn off the stove, because the heat will continue to cook the cornstarch and heat it up. And so you'll see there's actually not a lot of sauce right now, but if you are really into sauce, you can actually add more water. You can add more water and or more cornstarch at that point, if you want more sauce to coat your veggies. But again, none of this is brown. None of this is sweet and sour. That's not what we're going for today. And that's also not what I grew up eating. So actually, once you see that sauce has thickened a little bit, you see it's coated all of the veggies. And I wish you were here because it smells amazing. That is whenever you want to add your sesame oil. So again, the sesame oil, you can use it to cook. It's an extremely expensive oil, so I don't. But also, I think cooking actually decreases the savory flavor. So I like to drizzle it on top as a finishing oil on veggies, stir fries, soups, pretty much everything. And so now, here we go. We have a beautiful bok choy stir fry with tofu. And I'll do a little plating right here. And, of course, growing up Chinese, I am used to eating family style. So that means that there's a bunch of big pieces in the center, and everybody kind of serves themselves from it. Or in my family, as in many families, the eldest of the dining table serves it to everybody else. So now we have this beautiful product. And so this is great with white rice. You could even have it with noodles if you want to do like a stir fry noodle. I like to just boil noodles. I don't fry them at all. But yeah, here we go. We did that while talking in about 20 minutes, 25 minutes maybe. So, you know, you can do it too. I believe in you. And I'm early actually, so I didn't think that.
We have a couple questions. One, anyone who did not cook along, my kitchen also smells amazing. So for the upcoming cooking classes, I would encourage you to cook along so that you have dinner ready to go or brunch ready to go for the next one. When it's all said and done, it smells delicious. It looks delicious. I'm excited to test it out on my family. One question from Sarah: for cooking and general eating, what material do you recommend for people for chopsticks? Wood, stainless steel?
Sure, excellent question. So I use bamboo. So, you know, these are sold in packs of like 24 or something, couple bucks. And I like that just because they're very heat resistant. And they're pretty versatile because you also, if you have a nonstick pan, you're not scratching anything. They're wood. And they're easy to wash and sanitize. I actually throw mine in the dishwasher all the time to sanitize them. So metal chopsticks are typically used by Korean people. And I don't really know why. I don't have an answer for that. But I think a lot of different types of chopsticks. Please, like, you know, what works. I personally really love, if I can find it, Korean spoons because they're much longer. Because there's a lot of soup in Korean cuisine, South Korean cuisine. And I really love soups. So really, you know, go with what's comfortable for you. And, you know, I figure really cheap ones. I actually have a burned end because I. So yeah, for you. Other questions?
I feel like a Food Network host because I'm sitting here trying to eat and also ask questions. It's delicious, by the way. This is from Ellen, who's in Pittsburgh. Are there any grocers you'd recommend to buy tofu that's already fried? I've typically tried pressing it and frying it in an air fryer, but if I can avoid actually frying it in oil, that would be best.
Wow, yeah, kudos to you. I do not like frying anything in my house because I don't have a stove, so everything smells like fried everything. What I do is I put this so it comes already fried. It's in a package, ready to go. I get these either at many grocery in the Strip District, Lotus. That's right by Woolies in the Strip District. But you know, tofu comes in all different types of forms. This is just the fried version, and it saves effort and your whole house with oil. Yeah, I would recommend one of these packages. I think was less than $3, and for this dish that will, you know, it's probably 4 servings. I only used less than half the package, and these are also great in soups. I love it in hot pot if you've ever had that. And they're really great in stews as well. You can throw in the crock pot with some, like anything, basically. I like to do it with short ribs.
And I feel like this is like a sponsorship by Lotus Foods, but that's where I got all of my stuff for today as well. I love to buy all of my things in the Strip District. And for anyone who's not familiar, it's a great area of town where there's a lot of different cultural food grocers, some great local restaurants, cooking classes, breweries. Wiggle Whiskey is a local distillery down there. There's some really awesome spaces. So I'd advise you to check out next time you can get to Pittsburgh. The Strip District is a great spot.
Thanks, Allison. And just one quick note on a lot of Asian groceries. You know, things like COVID-19, this is not the first time a lot of Asian countries were hit first. So actually the habit of wearing masks, in my memory at least, has been at least 20 years. And it was just to show courtesy to, you know, my grandparents. If I was visiting and I was sick, I would just wear a mask. If I was going to my internship in China, I would wear a mask if I felt sick. So, you know, just one note about the Asian groceries is that they have done a phenomenal job with the physical distancing. And many more that I've noticed, because it's a very small grocery, they've literally built like a plastic little room around the cashier. And even there's kind of a doggy flap for the groceries. So nothing gets in, nothing gets in. So they've really protected their staff as well, which I really respect. Other questions?
Etha, Melissa asked if the slides can be shared.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, yeah, Melissa, we can send the presentation and we'll resend the recipe as well for anyone who may have missed it the first time around.
And please do follow me on Instagram. I think I will be launching a virtual cooking series. I think, you know, everyone at home is really interested in eating now and cooking, and I'm always happy to, you know, provide some tips and tricks. So yeah, please message me on Instagram. Check me out on Facebook. I'm much more active on Instagram for the Gen Zers out there.
Thanks, Jayshree. In case you're not looking at the chat, Etha, she said, this was awesome. Your tips were really good. If there aren't any more burning questions, we'll wrap up now. Thank you all so much for joining us. A couple things about next steps for the passport. We have a great panel tomorrow with nonprofit leaders from Sustainable Pittsburgh, Global Links, Hello Neighbor, which is a refugee and immigrant organization, and also Leadership Pittsburgh, talking about civic engagement and leadership, as well as opportunities for you to get engaged for volunteerism, internships, and full-time opportunities. I also wanted to share that you can continue to sign up. We just added another cooking class today with 412 Food Rescue, which is a local startup that's really transforming food waste in the region and is going out to other cities as well. And again, thank you to our sponsors, to Giant Eagle, Highmark, People's Gas, UPMC Health Plan, and specifically for our cooking series to Number One Cochrane, who is donating money to all of the small businesses who are participating to help us put this series on. So again, if you have any questions, please email passport@alleghanyconference.org. We're excited to see you for the next event. Stay well, be kind, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, Etha.
Thank you.